2 Kings chapter 5. Part of the story. You probably already know the story, but let's just read it to get it fresh. And starts right off. Naaman, the commander of the army for the king of Aram, was a man important to his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was a valiant warrior, but he had leprosy. Aram had gone on raids and brought back from the land of Israel a young girl who served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "Only my master were with the prophet who was in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went and told his master what the girl from the land of Israel had said. Therefore the king of Aram said, "Go, and I'll send a letter with you to the king of Israel." So he went, and he took with him 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. And he brought the letter and went to the king of Israel. This is what the letter said. "When this letter comes to you, note that I have sent you my servant Naaman, for you to cure him of his leprosy." Now when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God, killing and giving life, that this man expects me to cure a man of his leprosy? Know and see that he is only picking a fight with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why did you tear your clothes? Have him come to me, and he will know there's a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent him a messenger who said, "Go wash 7 times in the Jordan River, and your skin will be restored, and you will be clean." But Naaman was angry and left, saying, "I thought to myself, he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leprosy. Aren't Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and left in a rage. But his servants came to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more should you do it when he only tells you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So Naaman went down, dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times according to command of the man of God, and his skin was restored and became like the skin of a small child, and he was clean. We'll stop there. First, a geography lesson. In case you haven't looked at a map recently, on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, you have Lebanon, and you have the kingdom of Israel. Below that, the kingdom of Jordan. And just to the east of those 3 countries was the land of Aram, or Syria. Still that way today, if you look at a map. Syria is to the east of Lebanon and northern Israel, and a little bit of Moab. Of course, we call it the nation of Jordan today, but is to the south. The idea being that if you started in Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, you'd head northeast, not too far, and you'd come to Damascus, the capital of Aram. Now, there had been a big war between the 2 nations, and Aram had won. And after that, they had these raids where they send a band of soldiers into Israel, and they would plunder and take stuff from Israel. And along the way, they'd taken this young girl, and she was Mrs. Naaman's household assistant, we call it nowadays. The old King James, they call it, her maid, but a household assistant. Now, I want you to think about 2 people today, and that's it. Number 1, put yourself in the position of the girl. You're at home, and makes off with stuff, food, money, whatever they can find, and they also take you captive, and now you live in another country in the soldier's house, far from home. Maybe not that far, I don't know. I didn't look up to see just how many miles it is between Samaria and Damascus. Well, we don't know where the girl lived. It's not too terribly far, but far enough where she wasn't going back home again. She was stuck in Naaman's house. How would you have felt? Would you have felt kindly towards Naaman? Isn't this a great guy? He took me from my home, took all my folks' stuff, and brought me here.
Homesick.
Homesick. Yeah, I would have been homesick, absolutely. I also think it might have been a little bit.
Scared. Pissed off.
What's that?
Pissed off.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, you might be a little bit upset.
I'm scared.
Scared? So she works there, and Naaman gets this leprosy. Now, there's debate about just what it is. Is it like leprosy as we know it today, or something else? Who knows? But it was really bad news for him. And apparently, it's just getting started, and he knows that he's in bad trouble if he doesn't get it solved. This young lady is there, and she must have been working there for a while, because she and Mrs. Naaman seem to get along well. They're talking about what's happened to Naaman. We don't know a whole lot, right? This is all you hear about her, just what we read today. In the very beginning, all it says is they'd gone on raids to Israel and brought back from the land of Israel a young girl who was Mrs. Naaman's assistant. And all we know is she said to Mrs. Naaman, "If only my master were with the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his skin disease, his leprosy." First thing to note is this girl took to heart the idea to love your enemies. This was a clear case of an enemy soldier, and she was stuck as a slave in his house. But yet, she said to his wife, there's a prophet in Samaria who could heal him. Now, if she's a young girl, I don't know that she's had much interaction with Elisha. Who knows? Who knows where she came from? But she apparently had at least heard stories that Elisha, a lot of miracles followed Elisha. I'm sure you can think of some along the way. And he'd done quite a great work, and certainly was well known in Israel. And that's all she needed to know. Secondly, you don't get any sense that those feelings that we might have had if we were in her spot have cropped up. She's concerned for Naaman's, or interested in Naaman's healing. I'll say this, that you can see God at work in her heart, even though she's little. It says young girl. I don't know how young girl is, maybe 10, old enough where she can work around the house, maybe 12. In the Jewish world, a young girl I think would be less than 12, but somewhere in that area. You can see that God is, what she knows of God makes a difference in how she goes about her life and her work. And I want you to think for a minute about her missionary effort here. Because it turns out to be a missionary. When the story's all finished, Naaman serves the true God. Well, let's look at her missionary service. I put as a title of my sermon in the program, "Keep It Simple," because isn't it wonderful? She was a very effective missionary. Her first witnessing effort was 100% successful. So let's see how she did. First of all, she lived what she'd been taught and believed. Pretty simple, right? She lived what she'd been taught and what she believed. The next thing is, We don't have a lot of the story. But let's go for a minute and imagine. It doesn't seem like she'd been on a big campaign to convert Naaman or Mrs. Naaman. Along the way, she let God open the door. You know how God opened the door? Yeah, he struck Naaman with leprosy. Got his attention. And if you don't think God did it, just think of what Jesus' brother James writes about Elijah. He says that in the time of Elijah, remember Elisha comes right after Elijah. So it wasn't too many years ago that Elijah had prayed and the rain stopped for 3.5 years. See, it wasn't that, I read a commentary and everybody likes to say, well, God allowed something bad to happen. I don't think God waits around for something bad to come along. God has a plan. He acts on it. James says that Elijah prayed and the rain stopped. God stopped the rain to get the people's attention. God brought the leprosy to Naaman to get his attention.
Maybe because he had done something wrong in taking this girl from her home.
Well, you must have voted Ellen White says.
No?
That's her assessment. Maybe God brought the leprosy because, Naaman was culpable for taking the young girl captive. Maybe God knew that Naaman was ready to have his heart changed. And maybe that's why he took the young girl. What I like, though, is keep it simple. The young girl didn't go on a big campaign. When God brought the leprosy on Naaman, she said, there's somebody back in Samaria who can cure this. Her preaching and her effort wasn't too big. In fact, it was just maybe a couple sentences. And she was compassionate, as Norma says. When God opened the opportunity by the disease coming, she took the opportunity and said, I know what you need to do. Now notice this. This is a young girl, and this is the general of the army. He hears what the girl says, and he says, I'm on my way to Israel. Now, Israel and his nation were enemies. That tells me that he was in need. First thing to consider from this story is, just look at this young girl's missionary effort. God provided the opportunity. She took it. She did her part. And let God finish the job. She did what she was called to do. She did what she needed to do while she was there, and that was say, you got to go see the prophet. Now I want you for a minute to think about being Naaman. Pretend you're Naaman for a little while. Don't you done pretending you're the young lady. Pretend you're Naaman in this story. A few things about Naaman it tells us. He's the commander of the Arabian army. That's no small job. They were a powerful nation in those days. It says he was a mighty man of valor, if you want to read the King James, a mighty warrior, however you want to translate it. He's not just a stuffy administrator. He's a mighty warrior. He's a powerful man. And he's a powerful man in the nation because later on, we didn't read this part, but it says that he assists the king when the king goes to worship and so forth. He's in the highest echelons of the Arabian government. He's an influential and powerful person. A few other things about him. If you read the writings of the Jewish rabbis back long, long ago, the consensus is that he's the one that killed Ahab. Now you remember how that story went back in the first book of 1 Kings. There have been constant back and forth battles between the Arabian nation here in Syria and Israel. And one day, the king of Judah, our man Jehoshaphat, he goes down to visit Ahab, his brother-in-law. And while they're there, Ahab says, well, listen, I'm having no luck with the king of Aram. Why don't you join forces with me and let's defeat him? And Jehoshaphat, in one of his many lapses of judgment, somehow or other says, well, all right. And then a prophet comes and tells Ahab, if you do this, you'll die. But Ahab wasn't too interested in godly prophets, and he said, well, we're going to go anyway. So Jehoshaphat and Ahab get their soldiers together, and then in the second big lapse of judgment, Ahab says to Jehoshaphat, well, listen, I'm going to go in disguised, but Jehoshaphat, you wear your royal, your kingly attire when we go to the battle. Now the king of Aram was sick of all this and told his soldiers, don't bother with anybody else, but make sure you kill the king of Israel today. So when they see Jehoshaphat and all his robes, they think, oh, that must be the king of Israel, and they chase him, and God has to rescue him. So much for Jehoshaphat. But then the story ends by saying that a soldier drew his bow and hit Ahab between the joints in his armor, and you know what happens? Ahab dies that day. And according to the old Jewish rabbis, Naaman is that guy. Josephus believed that too. It doesn't say that in the Bible. So just to be clear, that's not a biblical idea, but it could be. It could be. Because you would imagine that person who won that victory that day might be elevated, as Naaman was, to be the commander of the army. So Naaman's had some experience in Israel before. He's a powerful man, and if that story is true, then he's a national hero, because you know what happened? The Israeli army all ran back home after that. And he's a national hero, but now he has a problem. He has leprosy. And he knows he's in trouble. And this girl says to him, you can imagine, go see the prophet in Samaria and he'll heal you. Well, you can tell that Naaman is in quite a bit of need, because he does just that. He goes and tells the king, well, listen, that little girl I took captive, she says I ought to go see the prophet in Samaria. Now, the prophets in Samaria have a reputation with the king of Aram. If you remember your history, you remember the king of Aram explaining, if you went back to read 1 Kings, that Elisha would tell the king what the Arabian army was going to do, where they were going to be. And, the king of Aram said, there must be a spy here, because the Israelis always seem to know exactly what we're going to do. So they knew all about the prophet. And they actually went and took the prophet captive. I don't know if you remember that story, right? So they're familiar with the prophet. But now, Naaman comes in and says, excuse me, king, I'm in a real jam here, and I need to go see the prophet to be healed. Can you imagine that's a little humbling for the national hero? And the king says, well, all right, I'll make it easier for you. I'll write you a letter to the king over there. So Naaman brings, did you hear that? 750 pounds, nearly half a ton of silver with him, and 150 pounds of gold. You know how much an ounce of gold is worth? These are pounds of gold. And 10 outfits, which are high fashion clothes. He expects that he expects a big solution to his problem, and he's ready to pay. Whether it's his money or whether it's the king's money, who knows? But he brings a very valuable reward with him, and off he goes to see the king. And remember, you're Naaman. You've got a really unsolvable problem somewhere on your arms, on your body somewhere, and you go see the king. And does the king pay him much respect? He says, no, you're just over here trying to stir up trouble, cause another war. Get out of here. That didn't make Naaman feel too good. Who knows how long it was when Elisha hears of this, and here's the king tore his clothes. And I'm sure David can remind us, is the king supposed to tear his clothes? Not in Israel. Right? So somehow Elisha, God tells Elisha that, or Elisha hears that and says, what are you doing? Just send them over here. Why are you trying to take on the job I have? Which is to represent God. So, Naaman brings his entourage, and if you read the story there, it isn't just Naaman on his horse. He's in his chariots. The chariots, of course, are the symbol of military power for the Arabians. And it doesn't say chariot. It says it's chariots. Right? So he has a large military contingent with him. And he has quite a few people. And he arrives to impress the prophet. But when he gets there, what kind of reception do you get if you're Naaman? The prophet doesn't even bother getting up from his chair. Right? He tells his servant, go out and tell that guy to go down and dip in the river 7 times. And Naaman thinks, well, I arrived with my military honor guard, and the guy wouldn't even come out to see me. Kind of humbling, if you're Naaman. Now, think about it if you're Naaman. Maybe we're a lot more like Naaman than we first think. We don't necessarily have leprosy, but we have an impossible problem that we need God to solve, don't we? And I told you that today's sermon was about keeping things simple. God doesn't give a 27-part Bible study set to Naaman. God says to Naaman, go wash in the river 7 times. That's it. End of study. But that was a powerful thing to do. And you can tell that it was a powerful thing to do because Naaman goes off in a huff. Wow. And you know what Naaman wanted to have happen because his assistants, whoever, his servants who were with him, come and say, hey, Naaman, if God had told you some big thing to do, wouldn't you have done it? But he gave you something really simple to do. Just stop in the river on the way home. You have to cross the Jordan River to get to Samaria from Damascus. Just back to your geography lesson. Just stop in the river and wash on the way home. So finally they persuade Naaman. But I want you to think a little bit about what it is if you're Naaman. What do you really want is he didn't want to have a big connection with God and this and that. He brought an elaborate gift and he was looking for a transaction. He was bringing his gift to God or to the prophet, and in return, he wanted to have his healing and go back. That's it. Keep his pride, his self-respect, his dignity, his position entirely intact. Maybe that's the way we approach things sometimes. Don't want to get any skin in the game.
Wasn't the Jordan a really dirty river? Wasn't that one of the things that he was disgusted with?
Well, it is, and I'll tell you why it must have been. You've seen the river right out here, our Sunset River. Now, if you were to go out there today, is it very muddy? You haven't looked. Well, look on the way home. All right? On the way home, see if it looks very muddy to you. It hasn't rained recently, and the river's really low. And I will guarantee you, did it rain last night? I don't think it rained last night, but I don't want to be wrong here. But if you go out and look in the river, it's going to be crystal clear, and you can see right to the bottom. Because there's not much water. It's just trickling along. It's nice and clear. But after we've had a real heavy-duty rainstorm, how does the river look? Like coffee. Right? It's brown and muddy. I want to tell you something about the Jordan River. The Jordan River, during the dry season, is about like Joe's Brook down here, where you turn to go up to Lynette's house. It's a little creek. Can you dip yourself 7 times in a creek? But if you're going to dip yourself 7 times, the water is probably high. That means it's flood stage. And just like our river, it's muddy. When it's deep enough, you can dip yourself in it. So yes, it's muddy. That's where that comes from, by the way.
Thank you.
All right? It's probably muddy. And it's not a beautiful place if you go to the Jordan River. Look it up sometimes. You can see some pictures of it. It's not like a nice shady grassy glade where you can relax by the trickling brook. It's a gravelly wasteland. because the river rises and falls a lot. So half the time it's all over the place, half the time it's small, and it's just kind of an unpleasant place. So that's where God told him to go. Go down to the Jordan River and wash. Now, Naaman, he wasn't interested maybe in starting a big relationship with God. He wanted to go, deliver his gift and his healing, and return successfully back to his role as the national hero and the commander of the army. But God had a different plan. God had a different plan for Naaman. God knew that Naaman was ready to serve him. And so the problem is that, like people, think of Nebuchadnezzar, right? God had to do a few strange things. No one would argue that naturally happened to Nebuchadnezzar, right? God turned him into a cow and sent him out to eat grass for a while. Or made him, I shouldn't say turned him into, but made him interested in going out and grazing grass like a cow. God can get people's attention. And God was out to get Naaman's attention. Let's see. You can tell that Naaman was in great need because he listened to the young lady. He had to humble himself by asking his enemies for help. He decided to make a big trip and took a lot of money. He was ready to put a lot of money in the game. But he was treated with disgust and displeasure by the king of Israel. That certainly took him down a peg. The prophet didn't treat him with any fanfare or respect, and didn't even dignify his visit by going to welcome him or invite him into his house or anything. And then, of all the things, rather than some ceremony that he felt was befitting of a man in his position, God just said, go dip in the river. Now, if you were going to go dip in a muddy river, you might be able to do it for once, right? Hold your nose, close your eyes, dip in, get out quick. But what did God say? 7 times. Yeah, you can't just get by with once. Now, this was altogether humbling. No more pretense, no more fancy army uniform, no more riding in your chariot with people to help you. Now it's just you in the water trying to dip yourself in the muddy water. God has stripped away all of his pretense and all of the things that he kind of identified with. And he had to do it 7 times. 7 times is kind of thorough, isn't it? He's going to be thoroughly washed by the time he comes out. And interestingly, notice that he's washed. Not only does his leprosy go away, but he has a new heart when he comes out of the river 7 times. You would almost consider it a baptism, and in fact, the Greek versions of the Old Testament use the same word for baptism here. He got baptized in the Jordan. Now, think of that. He actually enjoys sort of a distinction, because no less a person than Jesus himself was baptized pretty much at the same area in the Jordan River. A little bit later, right? But if you were to start out in Galilee in northern Israel and head east, you'd come to the Jordan River. And I don't know if it's the same place or not. It doesn't. It likely isn't. But Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Naaman was
What about
baptized.
the number 7? It's also God's number.
Yes, for completion, right? Because we're having a complete change of Naaman's heart.
Yes.
You're right. Now, notice that God didn't preach a complicated situation, a complicated doctrine here for Naaman to follow, or to learn, or to study, and have all these steps. God kept his evangelistic program extremely simple. No trouble, Naaman, just go down and wash in the river. But in so doing, he met all of the issues that were in Naaman's way. One simple thing met all of the issues. Naaman really wanted to have his skin problem healed with his respect and his pride and his position and his dignity still. He didn't want to submit to God. He just wanted to get rid of this disease. He was prepared to pay for it. Oftentimes, don't we make coming to God complicated? You have to do something or other to recommend yourself to God. Norma doesn't.
Just come as I am.
Just come as you are, just as I am. But it's often, I think, crosses your mind. Well, I need to do something for God, so He'll do something for me. But not Naaman. By the time it was over, Naaman couldn't even give his gift that he brought, or his payment, because Elisha recognized that, the same injunction that Jesus gave to his disciples: freely you have received, freely give. Don't expect anything in return. Notice that Elisha didn't say to Naaman, well, go wash in the river, and when you're finished, come on back here, and I'll be sure we have some priests here, so we can make sure that you're properly, inducted as an Israelite. He just said, go wash in the river. And he didn't even come out to say it. Send someone else to tell him, go wash in the river. Because you see, God was the one who was going to change the heart, not Elisha. And by the time Naaman got to the river, and by the time he was finished washing, his heart was changed. And now he sprang out of the river, and he went zooming back to Elisha's place. And his heart was already softened. Because he goes on and he asks Elisha, he says, well, listen, I still work for the king, so there's times I'm going to have to go into the idolatry, the temple of the idol there in Syria, or Aram, and he says, but listen, ask God to forgive me for that, because my heart isn't in that. I serve God now. And he picked up dirt and brought with him because he felt that, that place there was holy ground, and he wanted to spread that and build an altar so he could worship God. He was all in. Notice that Naaman humbled himself. Think about Jesus, who got baptized in the Jordan River. It was even more humbling for Jesus to be baptized in the Jordan River than it was for Naaman to be baptized in the Jordan River. In fact, John even says, listen, you don't need to be baptized, I do. And Jesus said, no. And if you read, off in the book of Philippians, Paul says Jesus humbled himself, becoming a servant. All of this is to say that God's plan is not complicated, it is simple. He's looking for each one of us to have the same experience. He's just looking for us to be completely humbled before Him. He wanted to know Naaman, he wanted Naaman to worship him. He wasn't worried about the leprosy. He was interested in the heart. God is that way with us. He's not so much worried about this, that, or the other problem that we face. He's interested in our hearts. And He will arrange whatever circumstances. He brought leprosy on Naaman here because He knew that Naaman was ready for his heart to be changed. And we'd be ready to have our hearts changed and not be as some here in the scripture. We read about the Pharisees, and Jesus' description of the Pharisees was, well, they're not going into the kingdom of heaven, but they make the way to the kingdom of heaven seem complicated and difficult. Let's follow in Naaman's footsteps here and humble ourselves before God, that our heart will be changed, and that, like the young girl, we'll make the way really simple for those around us to come to know God. God will do the work. Amen. So, in the spirit of making it simple, our closing song is simple. It's Jesus Loves Me, number 190. reaching out to others. Amen.